I always thought the world was kind. That people, even at their worst, had their reasons. That love, real love, could conquer everything. But then, one single message shattered all of that, and I understood that trust once broken could never be mended. The message came in a casual ding. A notification from my credit card company. At first I ignored it, just another routine alert. But when I opened it, my heart stopped cold. Unusual activity detected, $10,000 charged to a luxury hotel in Paris. Please verify immediately. My mind went blank. Paris? I hadn't been to Paris. I scrolled further, only to see more charges. Exclusive boutique purchase. $3,500 private jet ticket. $6,000 spa treatment, a $1,200. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. The transactions weren't just random, they were deliberate, extravagant, indulgent. And the name on the receipt wasn't mine. It was his. Mark, the man I had trusted with everything. The man I had loved with every piece of my heart. The man who had been using me all along. I sank into the chair, a cold wave of reality crashing over me. It wasn't just money he had stolen. It was my trust, my time, and my future. How had I been so blind? How had I given my heart, my life, my credit to someone who was only out for one thing? The betrayal stung like a physical wound. I thought I knew him. Mark, the man who called me his queen, the man who promised me a future. But as the truth settled in, I saw it all for what it was, a game. And I had been the fool. I clicked on the transactions to dig deeper, my fingers shaking as I moved from one charge to the next. $10,000 for a luxury hotel? A man who claimed he loved me could never afford that. But there, in black and white, was the evidence of his deception. He had been spending my money, on his false life. I felt something snap inside me. All those late nights, those whispered sweet words in my ear, those promises of a future together. They were all lies. And worse, the reality hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. He didn't just cheat on me emotionally, he had been stealing from me financially, using me as his personal ATM. I felt a rush of heat flood through me. How dare he? I slammed my phone down onto the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with more fraudulent charges. My world felt disoriented. Everything I had built, every dream, every plan, had been shattered by one man's greed. It was clear now, he wasn't just a cheater. He was a gold digger, a manipulator, who had been draining my resources and running up debts without my knowledge. And it wasn't just the money, it was the time. The years I had wasted with someone who only saw me as a means to an end. Someone who had used me, my love, and my trust for his own gain. Someone who had made me feel stupid for believing in him. I picked up the phone again, my hands trembling as I dialed his number. I had to confront him. Right now. There were no more excuses, no more pretending. This had gone far enough. The phone rang twice, then Mark's smooth, confident voice filled the line. "Hey Soph," he said, the sweetness in his tone making my skin crawl. "What's up?" "You're going to regret this," I said, my voice sharp. I could feel the anger rising, but there was also something else, something calmer. A realization. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice still too casual. "I thought we were good." "What's this about, babe?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about confronting him, it was about taking control. "I know about the charges, Mark," I said, my voice unwavering now. "I know about the hotels, the shopping, the jet tickets. You've been using my credit cards, haven't you?" There was a long pause. Then he spoke, and it was like I could feel the tension in his words. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but I knew he would. "Sophia, it's not like that." "Don't you dare lie to me," I interrupted. "I have the receipts, I have the proof. You've been stealing from me. You've been lying to me, manipulating me. For months. And I've been too blind to see it." His voice faltered, and I could hear the panic creeping in. But it wasn't enough. He had already done too much. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Soph. I just wanted to live a better life. I didn't think you'd ever notice," he said, almost pleading. It was the moment of truth. How would I respond? How would I deal with the devastation that had been put upon me by the very person I had loved? "Well, now I've noticed, Mark," I said coldly. "And you're going to pay for everything. You've ruined me. You've taken everything I've worked for, and now, I'm going to take it all back. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He hadn't expected this. But I wasn't going to let him take me down any further. This was it. The beginning of my rebirth. Sophia, please. Mark's voice became desperate, but I cut him off. No, you listen to me, Mark. This is over. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. You are nothing to me anymore. I'm taking back my life, my money, my dignity, and everything you've stolen from me. I hung up the phone. Sophia sat down, the weight of the conversation settling in. Her heart was pounding, but for the first time, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of determination. She had been betrayed, but now, she had the power to take back what was rightfully hers. No one could steal from her again. No one would manipulate her again. She had been reborn, and this time, she would be the one calling the shots. Sophia's breath was steady as she stared out the window of her small apartment. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the city, and in the distance, the bustling lights of traffic and neon signs blurred into the chaos of life moving on. But for her, everything had changed in the span of a few hours. Her heart, once heavy with the suffocating weight of betrayal, now thudded with a new purpose. The shock of Mark's deceit had morphed into a quiet fury, a sharp resolve that settled deep in her chest. She had been blinded by love, she realized, but now, she had seen the truth. The man she thought she would spend her life with had used her. Her love, her trust, and worst of all, her money. He had stolen not just from her finances but from the very core of her identity. Revenge wasn't just an option. It was her only path forward. Sophia walked across the room, her hands trembling slightly, but not from fear. This time, it was from the thrill of what was to come. She was going to take back everything that had been stolen from her. And Mark would pay for every penny, every broken promise. She had just made the call. She had hung up the phone with him, but this was just the beginning. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to let emotion cloud her judgment. This was about action and strategy. She would play this game, her game, and she would win. Sophia had always been meticulous, a woman who planned every detail. She had learned long ago that you couldn't let life take you by surprise. You had to control the narrative. Sitting down at her desk, she pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. She started writing a list of everything Mark had taken from her. Every hotel, every restaurant, every purchase, everything. Her mind worked like a well-oiled machine, recalling every transaction, every red flag she had overlooked. 1. $10,000 luxury hotel in Paris. 2. $5,000 private jet ticket to the Bahamas. 3. $3,500 for designer clothing at Luxe Boutique. 4. $1,200 spa day at Platinum Glow. She could feel the anger rising as she wrote each number down. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the manipulation, the lies, and the constant use of her. She had been too blind, too trusting, but she would no longer make that mistake. Sophia clicked her pen shut and set it down. Mark was a master at playing games, but he had underestimated her. She would turn the tables. She had to play the role of the patient predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. But there was one thing she needed more than anything: information. And Sophia was adept at getting what she needed. Sophia wasn't new to the world of online security. As a freelancer in marketing, she knew how to navigate databases, how to follow digital trails, and how to find out everything she needed to know. If Mark had been using her credit cards for his lavish lifestyle, then it was time to track every last transaction and uncover his secrets. The first step was simple. She needed to find out exactly where he had been spending her money. All of it. Her fingers danced across the keyboard as she logged into the banking app and scrolled through the charges. But this time, instead of simply seeing the numbers, she saw patterns. The high-end hotels that had no legitimate reason, the exotic shopping sprees, and the private jet that had taken him from one luxury to another, all while she had been working, unaware. Sophia dug deeper, clicking through digital receipts and analyzing every transaction. She found something strange. A set of hidden emails. Emails that didn't belong to her. They were under Mark's name, but they led to a secret account. An email thread between him and a shady business associate. A business that had helped him out when he needed money to keep up appearances. Her heart sank as she realized he hadn't just been using her for cash, he had been running a scheme, a plan to drain her finances, all while pretending to love her. Sophia clicked the email open. We need to make sure Sophia doesn't realize what's happening until it's too late. Just keep her spending, she's easy to manipulate. The credit card charges are all set up, we should be fine. The email was dated 3 months ago. Sophia's head spun. He had been planning this for months, carefully setting her up to be his personal ATM, while he pretended to be her partner. But now, the truth was out. She knew exactly what she was dealing with. Mark wasn't just a lover, he was a predator. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. There were many ways to handle this, but this was not just about taking back her money. It was about destroying him in the way he had destroyed her. She needed to be strategic. She needed to reclaim control, and the first step was to erase his ability to keep manipulating her. The first thing she would do was cut off access. She would freeze his accounts, lock down her credit cards, and begin reclaiming the money he had stolen. But she would do it in a way that he would never see coming. She needed to be smart about this. Her second move was more complex. She would use her knowledge of his financial connections to expose his schemes. She had his business connections, his secret accounts, and most importantly, she had his weaknesses. There were people he owed money to. There were legal loopholes he hadn't considered. She could use those to make his life a living nightmare. And then, when it was time, she would confront him. Not with desperation, but with confidence. She would show him that she was no longer the naive woman who had loved him blindly. She was the woman who had reborn herself, stronger and wiser, and ready to take back everything that was hers. But there was one more thing. The ultimate move. She would make him pay, and when she did, it would be on her terms. A week later, Sophia stood at the doorstep of his apartment. She had all the evidence. She had set everything into motion. He had no idea what was coming. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Mark opened the door, his face immediately falling when he saw her standing there. For the first time, he didn't look confident. He looked afraid. "Sophia? What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You don't get to ask me that," she said, her voice low and cold. "You've taken enough from me, Mark. Now it's time for you to lose everything." A day had passed since I stood at Mark's doorstep, and yet I still felt the anger coursing through me, a fire that had only begun to burn. But today was the beginning of something else. I wasn't the woman I was a week ago. I wasn't the naive girl who had been swayed by sweet words and promises of love. I wasn't the woman who had spent sleepless nights waiting for Mark to come home, wondering if he'd ever truly be there for me. No, today I was someone entirely different, a woman with a plan. A woman who would make him pay for every cent he had stolen, every lie he had told, and every ounce of trust he had betrayed. I paced the small apartment I had once shared with Mark, the very walls that had witnessed our relationship now feeling like an imprisonment. My fingers drummed nervously against the table as I sat, staring at my laptop, scrolling through the bank accounts, transactions, and secret files Mark had left scattered through the digital world. The enormity of his deceit overwhelmed me at first. But now, I could see it all clearly. Every charge, every purchase, every step he had taken to drain me of everything I had worked for. And I could trace it all back to his connection with that business associate, a man named Victor Delmar, whose name appeared repeatedly in the transactions. I clicked open another document, a series of emails I had uncovered during my investigation. Victor had been a silent partner in Mark's schemes, the one who had made sure the money kept flowing. But I also realized something crucial. Victor wasn't just a business partner. He had been manipulating Mark, pushing him to spend more and more, all while stringing him along with promises of success. Sophia doesn't have to know. She's too naive to see how easy it is to drain her. Just keep spending, keep her in the dark. The longer we wait, the bigger the return. I read the words over and over, each one like a dagger. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a pawn. And Victor had been pulling the strings all along. The more I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about manipulation. And now, I was in control. The first step was to cut off his access. I needed to ensure Mark couldn't use my credit cards, couldn't access the money he had stolen. But I also needed to make him feel the consequences of his actions. I logged into my banking app and started the process of freezing my accounts, setting up new alerts, and contacting my credit card company. But the real work, the work that would ruin him, wasn't just in the financial details. It was in the timing, the manipulation, and the exposure. I would use his own arrogance against him. Mark had never expected me to fight back. In his mind, I was the perfect victim. The loyal, trusting girlfriend who would never question him. But now, I would be his worst nightmare. I made a mental list of everything I needed to do. 1. Reclaim the stolen funds, reverse the fraudulent charges. 2. Expose Victor's role in this scheme, making him an accomplice in Mark's crimes. 3. Destroy Mark's reputation, leverage the information I had found to make him pay. And finally, the piece de resistance. I would take away the one thing Mark had always coveted. His illusion of success. A week passed in a blur. I gathered the necessary documents, made the phone calls, and built my strategy. The most challenging part, however, was how to break the news to Mark that I had taken back what was mine. He had to know that he could never manipulate me again. I picked up my phone and texted him. "We need to talk. I have the evidence. Your days of lying and stealing from me are over." The response came almost immediately. "Sophia, please. Don't do this. I swear I can explain. Let's talk. Just give me a chance." The messages that followed were filled with excuses, apologies, and promises. But I had seen enough. I wasn't the fool who would fall for his charming words again. I had no time for his guilt-ridden sob stories. I called him. "You've got 10 minutes, Mark," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "Explain yourself." He sounded desperate. The man who had once been so arrogant and confident, now sounded like a cornered animal. "Sophia, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to understand, I was under pressure. Victor and we thought it would be different, that it would turn into something good for both of us. I just didn't want you to worry." I could hear him rambling, but all I could feel was anger. A cold, controlled rage that simmered beneath my calm exterior. "No, Mark," I interrupted. "You didn't want me to worry, that's your excuse? The truth is, you were playing me, you used me, you've been using me for months, you've drained my accounts, you've lied to me, and I'm done." I let the words hang in the air between us, sharp and heavy, like a guillotine ready to fall. "What do you want, Sophia?" he asked, his voice trembling now. "I can fix it. I'll make things right." I couldn't help but smile coldly at the irony. He still thought he could charm his way out of this. But that was the mark of a manipulator, a man who thought his words could erase his deeds. "What do I want? I want my money back. Every penny you've stolen. I want you to pay for every single lie. And I want you to fall. I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly what you are. Because you're not getting away with this." He fell silent, and I could almost hear the realization sinking in. The man who had thought he was untouchable was about to face the consequences of his actions. The next day, I reached out to a lawyer I had worked with before, Lucas Gray, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer with a reputation for taking down financial criminals. He was the perfect person to help me with what was about to happen. Lucas had no idea about Mark, but once I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. He was already preparing to make the necessary legal moves to bring Mark and Victor down. "You've got the evidence, Sophia?" Lucas asked when we spoke. "This isn't just about recovering your money, this is about making them pay for their crimes. We can sue, we can expose everything they've done, but we need to move quickly, they won't see it coming." I nodded, the thrill of control surging through me. Mark's world, his illusion of success, was about to come crashing down. The legal letters went out the next morning, and within a few days, Mark's contacts were getting cold feet. Victor was panicking, and the first whispers of Mark's downfall began circulating in the business world. But it wasn't just about the financial restitution, it was about something deeper, something more personal. I was taking back my life, reclaiming the power that had been stolen from me. Mark had tried to turn me into a victim, but now, I was the one in control. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman who had emerged from the wreckage of betrayal. This wasn't the same woman who had cried herself to sleep, who had let someone else control her fate. No, this woman was strong, calculated, and ready. The game was no longer about love or trust. It was about revenge, and reclaiming everything I had worked for. Mark would pay, and by the time I was finished, nothing would remain of his perfect world. He would be nothing but a footnote in the story of my rise. The silence was deafening. Sophia stood outside Mark's penthouse, her heart racing in her chest, but not from fear. No. It was calculation now. A carefully planned storm that had been brewing for months, and now, she was finally here. She wasn't the same woman who had been so blindly in love with him. She had become something different, something stronger. It was time for consequences. Time for Mark to pay for everything he had stolen from her. Money, trust, and her peace. He thought he could outsmart her, use her as a pawn, as a resource to keep his fake life afloat. But Sophia wasn't here for apologies or empty explanations. She had come for one thing, revenge. She took a deep breath before pressing the doorbell. The door opened, and there he was, Mark. He looked the same, his dark hair slightly messy, his expensive clothes fitting perfectly, as though nothing had changed. But Sophia knew better. Behind his flawless facade, there was a man whose world was about to crumble. "Sophia," he said, his voice laced with a mix of surprise and something else. Was it guilt? Was it fear? He stepped aside, letting her enter. "I didn't think I'd see you here again. I thought we could talk this through." Sophia walked past him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. She felt the weight of the moment in her chest but refused to show it. This wasn't about closure, this was about control. "Talk?" "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," she said, turning to face him. "You've already said everything I need to hear. Your actions have already spoken louder than your words." Mark closed the door behind her, his face flushing with a mix of frustration and uncertainty. He seemed to take a step back, like he wasn't quite sure how to proceed. Good, Sophia thought. He wasn't in control anymore. "Sophia, I know I've made mistakes," he began, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "But please, understand. I wasn't thinking clearly. It's all been a mess, but I swear I didn't mean for it to go this far." Sophia's lips curled into a thin smile. She had heard it all before, the excuses, the apologies, the promises of change. But none of that mattered anymore. "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" she repeated, her voice steady but ice cold. "You didn't mean for it to go this far when you were using my credit cards to buy your way into a fake life? When you were draining my accounts and pretending to love me while you were spending my money on hotels and private jets?" Mark shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to the floor. He couldn't meet her gaze. She could see it now. The shame creeping into his eyes. "I was trying to build something, Sophia," he muttered. "I thought it would all work out. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" Sophia interrupted, stepping closer to him, her eyes locked onto his, and she felt a surge of power rise within her. "You thought I wouldn't notice? That you could take my hard-earned money and betray me without consequences?" Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He knew. He knew there was nothing he could say to make this right. There was no apology that could undo the damage he had caused. The lies, the deceit. It was all too much. Sophia took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the moment. She would not back down. She would not allow herself to be weak anymore. Mark had made her feel small, and now, it was time for him to feel the weight of his own arrogance. "This ends now, Mark," she said, her voice low but powerful. "You are going to lose everything you've gained from my money, my trust, and my love." Sophia had already taken the first steps in her plan. Mark had no idea what was coming. He thought he was still in control, that he could talk his way out of this. But he hadn't counted on the one thing she had, the information. She pulled out her phone and unlocked it, pulling up the documents she had spent the last week gathering. Every fraudulent charge, every suspicious transaction, every secret email and hidden business deal. She laid it all bare in front of him. "You thought you could hide behind your lies, didn't you?" she said, her eyes cold as she looked at the phone screen. "You thought I wouldn't find out about your secret business partner, Victor Delmar. You thought I wouldn't find the emails where you planned every theft." Mark's face went pale. He was cornered now, and he knew it. You can't do this," he stammered. "You don't have any evidence. You can't take me down like this." Sophia's lips twitched into a smirk. She had been patient, but now, the game was about to end. "I already have everything I need," she said, tapping her phone. You see, Mark, it's not just about the money. It's about exposing you for what you are, a fraud, a manipulator, and a gold digger. Sophia took a step back, her eyes never leaving Mark. He was already crumbling before her. He had built his entire life on her trust, on the lies he had spun to keep her dependent. But now, it was all falling apart. You have two choices, she said, her voice sharp and steady. You can leave this apartment, walk away, and pretend like nothing happened, or you can face the consequences. Mark swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. She could see the panic setting in. He wasn't used to being powerless. He wasn't used to having to face the truth. You can't expose me, Sophia, he said, his voice desperate. You don't have the connections, the power. Oh, but I do, she interrupted, holding up her phone. I have connections, Mark. You've been playing a dangerous game, and now, the game is mine. I'm going to make sure you pay for every single penny you've stolen from me, and then, I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are. Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. For the first time in their relationship, he was the one who was scared. She had taken control. I'm going to ruin you, Mark. Your business, your reputation, your lies, they will all come crumbling down. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Mark had lost, and he knew it. His once perfect life was about to disintegrate into nothing. Sophia stood there, feeling the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. It was one thing to take back your money. It was another to destroy the empire of the man who had tried to steal your future. Get out, she said, her voice firm. And don't ever come back. Mark didn't say another word. His face twisted with anger and shame, but he knew he had been beaten. He turned and walked out of the apartment, his footsteps heavy, his world already unraveling. Sophia watched him go, feeling a surge of empowerment wash over her. The past few days had been a whirlwind of anger and rage. But now she was something more. She was free. And she was in control. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas, the lawyer she had hired. We're ready to move forward with the legal action. Mark won't know what hit him. Sophia smiled. This was just the beginning. The revenge was already underway, and Mark would have to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor of Sophia's apartment. She sat at her desk, her mind focused and sharp, like the tip of a blade. The events of the past week had shaken her, but they had also hardened her resolve. Mark's betrayal had not only been a betrayal of love, it had been an affront to her intelligence, to the very essence of her being. She was no longer the naive woman who believed in perfect love and loyalty. That woman had been broken, and now the woman before the mirror was someone entirely different. A woman of strength, of strategy, and most importantly, of revenge. Sophia's phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her concentration. It was an email from Lucas Gray, the lawyer who had helped her bring this plan to fruition. The first round of legal actions has been initiated. We've also sent out subpoenas to his business associates and partners. Mark and his little friend Victor Delmar are going to wish they had never crossed you. A wicked smile curled on Sophia's lips. She wasn't just going after Mark. She was going after everything he had built. And she would make sure that everything he had stolen from her, both financially and emotionally, would be returned tenfold. But the real game was about to begin. Sophia had known for a while that Victor Delmar was a key player in this game. He wasn't just some random business associate of Mark's. He was the puppet master, the one who had been pulling the strings. He had been the one encouraging Mark to spend lavishly, to drain Sophia's accounts to fuel his own ambition. Victor had always been in the shadows, hidden behind Mark's lies, but now it was time for him to face the light. Sophia's plan was simple: expose Victor. He was the key to breaking Mark down, to unraveling the empire they had tried to build on her money. And she knew just how to make him pay for his part in this twisted drama. Sophia took a deep breath before dialing the number. It was time to bring him into the fold. Hello, Victor Delmar speaking. His voice came through the line, cool and collected, as if nothing were out of place. But Sophia could hear the faint nervousness in his tone. The way he was trying to hide his anxiety. Perfect, she thought. She had already done her homework, and Victor had no idea who he was dealing with. Victor, it's Sophia Williams, she said, her voice calm but laced with authority. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he responded. Sophia, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. His voice wavered, just slightly. What is this about? Sophia leaned back in her chair, her eyes focused on the city below her. She had the upper hand now. Victor had no idea what was coming. I know what you've been doing, she said, her voice growing firmer. I know about the transactions, the charges, the manipulation. You and Mark thought you could play me. Well, I'm here to tell you that the game's over. Victor's voice turned defensive. You don't know what you're talking about, Sophia. He said quickly. I have no idea what you think you've discovered. Mark and I have always been business partners, nothing more. Cut the crap, Victor, Sophia interrupted, her tone sharp like a blade. I know about the fake business deals, the money laundering, and how you both used my credit cards to fund your little empire. The real estate deals, the offshore accounts, it's all there. I've seen it. Now here's how this is going to go. You're going to make this right, or I'll expose everything. Every last detail. You think you're untouchable, but trust me, you're not. She let the silence hang between them. The power she had over him was intoxicating. Victor wasn't used to being challenged, to being exposed. He was used to controlling the narrative, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. But Sophia was no longer the puppet, she was the master. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. What do you want, Sophia? He asked, his pride slipping through the cracks. I want you to come clean, she said. I want you to make sure Mark understands that this is just the beginning. You will not get away with it, and neither will he. There was a moment of silence before Victor responded, his voice edged with fear. What if I don't? What will you do? Sophia's smile was cold. You'll regret it, she said simply. I promise you, I will make sure you lose everything, your reputation, your money, your freedom, all gone. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself. With that, she ended the call, leaving Victor to contemplate the consequences of his actions. It didn't take long for Sophia to set her next move into motion. Mark, like the arrogant fool he was, had underestimated her. He thought he could crawl back into her life, that he could apologize his way out of this. But this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about retribution. Sophia had already made the necessary arrangements. She had set up a meeting with the media, arranged interviews with investigative journalists, and prepared her legal documents for the public exposure of both Mark and Victor. She knew that the truth was the most powerful weapon. She was going to destroy their lives, piece by piece. Public exposure would be the final blow. They wouldn't just lose their money, they would lose their respect, their credibility, and their control over the narrative. The evening of the press conference arrived. The room was filled with reporters, photographers, and a few of Sophia's allies in the legal and financial world. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, and now it was time for Mark and Victor to face the consequences. Sophia stood at the front of the room, the lights of the cameras flashing as she approached the podium. She felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment, the culmination of everything she had worked for. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice steady, commanding. I'm here today to expose the truth about the man who thought he could steal from me, Mark Jensen, and the man who helped him, Victor Delmar. The room grew silent, as the journalists leaned forward, eager for the story they were about to hear. Sophia laid out the facts, everything she had uncovered, every fraudulent transaction, every lie. She explained how Mark had used her credit cards, draining her finances for his luxurious lifestyle, and how Victor Delmar had been the silent partner behind the scenes, orchestrating the entire scheme. She showed them the emails, the documents, and the evidence she had gathered. By the time she finished, the room was electric with anticipation. The weight of the truth was overwhelming, and Mark's reputation was in shambles. But Sophia wasn't finished. She turned to the reporters. This isn't just about revenge, she said, her voice now full of resolve. This is about justice. No one should be allowed to use someone else for their own gain. And I'm going to make sure this never happens again. No one should feel powerless, not me, not anyone. Sophia stood at the edge of her apartment, watching as the news cycle swirled around her. The air felt heavy with tension, as though the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable aftermath. The press conference had been a success, and yet, the satisfaction she had expected was absent. The weight of revenge had settled into her bones, but it didn't come with the sense of peace she had imagined. Instead, there was a strange feeling of emptiness. The final pieces of her plan were now in motion. Mark's fall from grace had begun, and with it the disintegration of everything he had carefully crafted. But while she could see the beginning of his downfall, the truth was that the pain he had caused her still lingered, echoing in her chest like a wound that refused to heal. She wasn't just taking back what he had stolen from her. She was rebuilding herself from the ruins of a life she thought was perfect. And she was doing it with methodical precision. The day after the press conference, Sophia received a message from Lucas, her lawyer. His email was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything that was about to come crashing down on Mark and Victor. "We've filed for civil suits. The charges will be formalized within the next 48 hours. The media storm is already beginning, and we've managed to get in touch with a key witness who can testify about Victor Delmar's role in the financial manipulation. We also have surveillance footage confirming the hotel charges and the private jet bookings. They won't get away with this." Sophia stared at the message, her heart beating a little faster. The legal system was now involved, and the public exposure had set the stage for Mark's ruin. But there was more to come. The media had picked up on the story like wildfire. But Sophia wasn't ready to sit back and watch from the sidelines. She was going to ensure that every ounce of their deceit was laid bare, and that Mark and Victor would have to face the world they had built, shattered and exposed. Mark had been keeping quiet, or so he thought. Sophia had anticipated his reaction, his guilt and denial. But she hadn't expected the desperation that followed. 2 days after the press conference, he showed up at her door, unannounced, his face drawn with exhaustion. He was wearing his typical expensive clothes, trying to maintain an air of control, but the cracks were visible now. The man who had once seemed invincible was now a shell of the person he had been. "Sophia, please. This is insane." Mark's voice trembled as he stood in the doorway, his hands raised in what seemed like an attempt to appear calm. "You're ruining me. You're ruining my life. This isn't who I am. I never meant for this to go this far." Sophia didn't flinch. Her resolve had never been clearer. The time for talk had ended. The time for action had begun. "You think I'm ruining your life, Mark?" she asked, her voice low but filled with power. "You ruined mine. You ruined everything I worked for. You thought you could use me, manipulate me. And now you're here asking for mercy?" Mark's face twisted, his eyes desperate. For the first time, he wasn't the confident, manipulative man who had weaseled his way into her life. Now, he was broken. And it wasn't satisfying. It was sad. "I was in a bad place, Sophia," he continued, his voice cracking. "I didn't know how to deal with everything. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought we'd get past it. We could get past it. You and me. We had something real." Sophia could feel the words pulling at her, but she wasn't going to let him reel her back in. She had done the work. She had evolved, and she wasn't the same woman who had been manipulated into blind love. "No," she said firmly, stepping away from him. "We never had something real, Mark. You were using me from the very beginning, and now I'm taking back what's mine. You lost the right to play the victim." His shoulders slumped as he stared at the floor. "You don't understand, Sophia. I had no choice," he whispered, almost to himself. "I needed a way out. I thought you'd never notice. It just got out of hand." Sophia stood still, staring at him. She had heard all of this before. The excuses. The pleas. It was the same story, the same manipulation, wrapped in a different package. "Get out, Mark," she said, her voice even and detached. "You don't get to play the victim. Not anymore. This is where your story ends." While Mark was in his downward spiral, the real enemy, Victor Delmar, was already beginning to face the consequences of his own greed. Sophia had made sure to connect every dot, and Victor's business empire was beginning to unravel. Sophia had reached out to private investigators and journalists, carefully feeding them just enough information to expose Victor's involvement in the financial scheme. His name was hidden in plain sight, tucked away in shady business deals and offshore accounts, but now it was all coming to light. She was methodically gathering everything she could, every email, every transaction, every secret Victor had hidden away. And once it was all laid out, there would be nowhere for him to hide. The public would see the truth, and his reputation, much like Mark's, would shatter. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Sophia knew that she needed to speak with Victor directly. If she was going to expose him fully, she had to hear it from his own lips. And she would make him pay for every lie he had told, for every manipulation he had made to destroy her life. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood outside the sleek glass doors of Victor Delmar's office building. It was time. She had everything prepared, the evidence, the strategy, and the grit. She was ready to take on the man who had been orchestrating Mark's financial empire of lies. Victor's office was on the top floor, the walls lined with windows that overlooked the sprawling city. She was escorted in by his assistant, who gave her an uncertain look as she passed. She had already sent a message to Victor, informing him of her arrival. It was time to confront the man who had been hiding in the shadows. Victor was sitting behind a massive desk, his sharp eyes scanning through papers when she entered. His expression shifted when he saw her, surprise mixed with something darker, a flicker of recognition. "Sophia, what brings you here?" His voice was smooth, but there was an undercurrent of tension in it. He hadn't expected her to come directly. Sophia walked up to his desk, standing tall, her gaze unwavering. "You thought you could hide behind Mark, didn't you?" she said, her voice as cold as ice. "You thought no one would ever figure out what you and he were doing. But I've got all your little secrets, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing, assessing her with a mix of annoyance and danger. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Sophia," he said, his tone turning almost dismissive. "You think you've won, that this little game of yours will bring me down? You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't understand." Sophia's eyes flashed. She leaned forward slightly, her expression intense. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I understand more than you think, and now, it's your turn to lose everything. You've been running a scheme to steal from people like me, and it's over. I've already got the proof. You can't run from the truth anymore." Victor's smirk faltered, his expression turning into one of cold calculation. "You think exposing me will change anything?" "It's already too late," he said, leaning forward, his voice laced with malice. "If you think you can ruin me, you'll have a fight on your hands. And I always win, Sophia." Sophia felt a wave of calmness settle over her. She wasn't afraid of him. She had already won. "You'll see soon enough," she said, standing up straight. "The truth has already been set into motion. You're both going down. And there's nothing you can do about it." It was time. Time for everything to come full circle. Sophia Williams had spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, the culmination of months of deceit, heartbreak, and revenge. She had already struck Mark down, exposing him to the world. Now, the last piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place, and Victor Delmar would finally see the cost of his actions. The truth had already been laid bare. The press, the legal suits, the media storm, they had all come together to ensure Mark's and Victor's downfall. But there was still one last thing Sophia had to do: take back her life, and make sure that nothing was left for them. She stood by the window of her apartment. The city sprawled out below her. The world was moving on, but for the first time, it felt like she was in control. She had orchestrated their fall with the precision of a master, and now, there was no turning back. Sophia's mind raced as she thought back to everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the realization that the man she had loved had used her for his own gain. The weight of it all had been unbearable. But now she had become the woman she was meant to be, strong, empowered, and undeniable. The pieces of her plan had already started to take shape. With the media exposing Victor's and Mark's shady dealings, the legal investigations into their fraudulent activities were already underway. Sophia's next move was to solidify her victory, and ensure that they would never recover from their deceit. She called Lucas Gray, her lawyer, to confirm the last step of her plan. "Lucas, it's time," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of satisfaction. "I need you to make the final call. We need to send a clear message, that they can't escape the consequences of their actions." On the other end of the line, Lucas's voice was full of confidence. "It's already done. I've got the papers ready to make sure Victor and Mark are completely discredited. The media coverage is already taking a life of its own, and the legal system will do the rest. They'll both lose everything, their money, their business, their reputation. You're in control now. Sophia felt the weight of those words. She had won. Mark's reaction was just as predictable as it had been the first time he tried to apologize. Once the press release went live, once the articles started flooding the news cycle, Mark's world imploded. He had tried to run from the truth, but now he was standing in front of it, helpless. It wasn't just the legal ramifications. Mark's name was now toxic. The journalists had exposed his lies, his financial misdeeds, and the world now knew him as the man who had manipulated his girlfriend, stolen her money, and spent it all on his own selfish desires. His once polished reputation now lay in ruins. Sophia watched it all unfold on her laptop, the articles, the tweets, the shocked reactions from his business contacts, and the public turning against him. There was no coming back from this. He had lost everything. His last-ditch effort to reach out to her was a simple, desperate message. Please, Sophia. I'm sorry, I made a huge mistake. I need your help. Please don't destroy me. She felt no pity, only satisfaction. The man who had broken her, emotionally and financially, was now the one who was broken. You should have thought about that before, she muttered to herself, deleting his message without hesitation. The world would now see Mark for what he truly was. A manipulator with no regard for the people he used along the way. She had ensured that he would never recover. While Mark's fall was inevitable, Victor Delmar's was far more delicate. He had built his empire on manipulation, and now it was time for him to fall just as hard as Mark had. Victor's wealth and reputation were tied to shadowy business deals, offshore accounts, and illegal activities that would all come to light in the next few weeks. Sophia had made sure to contact the authorities about the business ties between Victor and Mark, exposing how they had used false identities and offshore accounts to fund their lavish lifestyles and launder money. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about taking away Victor's prestige, his connections, and his ability to manipulate others. Sophia knew that Victor's downfall would not be as public as Mark's, but it would be just as devastating. The authorities were already in the process of confiscating his assets, freezing his accounts, and sending his name to the public registry of financial criminals. Sophia had destroyed Mark and Victor in the eyes of the world. Their financial empire, built on lies and exploitation, was crumbling, and their reputations were tarnished beyond repair. But there was still one last matter to address. Sophia had prepared herself for this moment, the final confrontation with Victor Delmar. She knew he was dangerous, but she was ready to face him head-on. He had been the mastermind behind the whole scheme, the one who had manipulated Mark, and she was going to make sure that he paid for every sin. Sophia arranged to meet Victor in a secluded cafe in the outskirts of the city, where there would be no witnesses. She had to see him, to face him one last time, and let him know that the game was over. When she entered the cafe, Victor was already there, sitting at a corner table, his back to her. He looked like the same slick businessman who had tried to use his charm to get what he wanted. But now, he was a man on the run, the once cocky demeanor replaced with unease. He looked up when she approached, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't decide whether to be angry or afraid. But Sophia could see the fear in his eyes, and that was enough. "Sophia?" Victor greeted her, his voice strained. "What is this? What do you want from me?" She sat down across from him, her gaze cold and calculating. There was no room for pleasantries anymore. "I've already taken everything you care about," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "Your business, your money, your credibility. You'll be nothing but a footnote in a scandal. Do you feel that, Victor? The weight of your mistakes?" Victor's jaw clenched. He leaned forward, his hands shaking. "You think you've won, don't you?" He spat. "You think you can take me down just like that? You don't know who I am. You don't know the people I know." Sophia leaned back in her chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. She had anticipated this. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," she said, her voice steady. "And I know that this," she gestured around the cafe, "is the last time you'll be able to hide. Your empire is falling apart. No one's going to come to your rescue, Victor. You're done." Victor's eyes flashed with rage, but beneath it, there was something else, fear. The truth had already come for him. "You think you can just expose me and walk away?" he hissed. "There are consequences for people like you." Sophia's expression softened, just for a moment, before she stood up. "The only consequence here, Victor," she said calmly, "is that I won. And you'll have to live with the shame of everything you did." She turned and walked away, leaving him in the cafe, his future slipping through his fingers. The world had shifted in ways Sophia could barely keep up with. It felt as if the storm had passed, and now, she was left standing in the eye of it, feeling the sudden silence after the chaos. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the revenge, the consequences, was both liberating and exhausting. It had been weeks since her press conference, and she had lived through a whirlwind of media coverage, legal battles, and the destruction of Mark and Victor's carefully curated lives. Sophia had won. She had taken back her money, exposed the men who had manipulated and used her, and shattered their illusion of control. But the one thing she hadn't expected was how empty she felt standing on the other side of it all. Mark was gone. The once charming lover who had promised her a future, the man who had made her feel special and loved, was now a pariah. His name was everywhere, on the headlines, in the gossip columns, and in the courtroom. The media had torn him apart, and his business had collapsed. His assets were frozen, his reputation tarnished, and his chances of recovery were slim. Sophia's legal team had already moved forward with the civil lawsuit, and the charges were piling up. Mark had lost everything. But it wasn't just about him. Victor Delmar's empire, built on shady dealings and illegal transactions, had crumbled as well. The legal system had intervened swiftly, freezing his assets and launching investigations into his businesses. His reputation was ruined. The whispers of his corruption and his role in Mark's schemes would haunt him for the rest of his life. His fall was slower, more calculated, but no less devastating. For Sophia, the emotional toll had been much heavier than she'd ever imagined. The process of revenge had been consuming, leaving her exhausted and wondering if she had truly gotten the closure she'd been after. Yes, she had taken back everything, but the process had taken something from her too. She had changed, and while that change was empowering, it had also come at a cost. Days turned into weeks. The media cycle eventually moved on to the next scandal, the next headline. But for Sophia, the healing process had only just begun. The revenge had been satisfying in the short term, but now she was left with the task of rebuilding her life. Rebuilding herself. Sophia sat in the small cafe where she used to meet Mark. It was quiet now, the once bustling place now just another part of her past. She stared out the window, watching the world go by, and for the first time in weeks she could breathe without the weight of anger on her chest. She wasn't angry anymore. She had conquered that part of her. The woman sitting in front of the window wasn't the same woman who had once been deceived by a man she thought she loved. No. This woman was stronger, wiser, and had taken back what was rightfully hers. She had faced the darkness, confronted her pain, and emerged on the other side with control of her life once more. Sophia pulled out her phone and began writing an email to her new business contacts, clients she had secured in the wake of her public exposure. Her freelance marketing business was booming. Her name was now synonymous with strength and resilience, and people were reaching out to work with her. They saw the fire in her, the very fire that had burned away the weaknesses of her past. "Thank you for your patience," she typed, her fingers flying across the keys. "I look forward to continuing our work together, and turning ideas into powerful campaigns. Let's make this year the best yet." It wasn't just about the work. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. Sophia had finally found peace. Sophia hadn't expected the freedom that came with it all. The weight she had carried for so long, the fear, the shame, the vulnerability, had evaporated. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free. She took a long sip from her coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her as the thoughts of Mark and Victor became a distant memory. They were no longer a part of her life. Their presence, their betrayal, had been a moment in her journey, a chapter in her book. But now, she was writing her own story. It was then that she saw the reflection in the cafe window, herself, sitting there. For the first time she saw the woman she had become, strong, independent and whole. The woman in the reflection wasn't just Sophia anymore, she was a queen who had been reborn. The phone buzzed in her bag, breaking the silence. She hesitated before answering. It was a number she didn't recognize. But something told her to pick it up. "Hello? Sophia?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took a moment for her to place it. "It's Lucas. I just wanted to let you know that we've won the case. The judge ruled in your favor, and the restitution you've requested is going to be processed. Everything's been finalized. Your money is coming back, and we're moving forward with the civil suit against Mark and Victor." Sophia sat back in her chair, the news settling over her like a warm blanket. She had won, not just the battle, but the war. "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for everything." She hung up the phone, the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. She had won, and in the process, she had reclaimed everything she had lost. The rest of the year passed quickly. Sophia continued to grow her business, expanding into new markets, and making a name for herself as a consultant in the world of digital marketing. Her work was innovative, her approach refreshing, and her reputation as a force to be reckoned with solidified. But more than her career, Sophia began to heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. She traveled to places she had always dreamed of: Paris, New York, Tokyo, and each journey brought her new experiences, new opportunities, and new growth. She met people who challenged her thinking, who pushed her to be better, and most importantly, she made new connections, both in her career and in her personal life. And then, one evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, Sophia stood in front of the mirror. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She was whole. She had taken back what was hers, and now, she was building the future she had always wanted, not just for herself, but for the woman she had become. It had been a year since Sophia had set her plan in motion. A year since she had confronted Mark and Victor, since she had taken back everything they had stolen, and since she had started to rebuild the pieces of her life. In that time, she had seen the world change, but most importantly, she had changed. Her business had flourished, her confidence had blossomed, and her sense of peace was something she had never known before. She stood at the window of her new office, overlooking the bustling city below. The view was different than before. There were no more doubts clouding her vision. She could see everything clearly now, the world unfolding in front of her, her future limitless. Sophia had spent so many years focused on being loved, being needed. For so long, her identity had been tied to someone else. Mark had come into her life like a prince, charming and filled with promises of a future they would build together. But now she realized she had been the one who had built the future all along. The old Sophia was gone, the woman who had been afraid to stand up for herself, the woman who had sacrificed everything for love, had been reborn into something much stronger, much more self-assured. The success she had found in her marketing career was only a reflection of the strength she had discovered within herself. She had started as a freelancer, unsure of what the future would hold, but now she ran a company that specialized in helping women reclaim their power in a world that often sought to diminish them. She had become a mentor to other women, teaching them how to build financial independence, how to thrive, and how to take back what was rightfully theirs. Sophia's story had become a testament to her journey, a journey of loss, revenge, and ultimately, empowerment. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the spark that had ignited her transformation. In the end, Mark and Victor were no longer part of her narrative. They had been a chapter in her life, one that she had closed and locked away. Her business was growing exponentially, and the publicity around her personal story had only amplified her success. More clients than ever sought out her services, intrigued not just by her professional expertise, but by the courage she had shown in the face of adversity. One quiet evening, after a day filled with meetings and brainstorming sessions, Sophia took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. She was sitting on the balcony of her apartment, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The journey had been long, but it had led her to this moment. A moment of peace, of clarity, and of pride in the woman she had become. She thought about Mark, about the way he had once held her heart in his hands, only to crush it beneath his selfishness. She thought about Victor, the man who had played her like a fool, only to now face his own downfall. And yet, Sophia wasn't angry. She had been angry, yes, bitter even. But anger was like poison. And she had learned that it could only hurt the one holding it. Forgiveness wasn't necessary. But the peace she felt now was. She had let go of the past, reclaimed her future, and now she stood at the precipice of a new life. The woman she had been, The woman who had been vulnerable, trusting, and naive, was a memory. But the new Sophia was strong, independent, and empowered. She smiled to herself, as she thought of everything she had accomplished. The revenge had been sweet, but it wasn't the end of the story. It had only been the beginning. Sophia glanced at her phone. A message from one of her clients popped up. It was a business proposal. An opportunity for her to expand into new markets, to reach more people who needed her expertise. She set her glass down and began typing out a response. As she did, she realized that this was her life now. This was what she had worked for, the success, the freedom, and the opportunity to help others who had faced what she had faced. She would use her experiences, her power, and her knowledge to lift others up. "Let's do this," she typed, a smile curling at the corners of her lips. "I'm ready for the next challenge." As the night settled in, Sophia stood up and walked to her window. The city below was alive, but for her, it felt like the world had become a canvas, one she could now paint with the strokes of her own choosing. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't the woman who had lost. Sophia Williams was now the woman who had risen. She had taken back her life, her power, and her freedom. And now, she was ready to claim the future she had always deserved.